Each of them were anxious to make the most of the day, sure that if they got their timing right, they would be heroes back home. Their minds ran with the possibilities that lay ahead. It wouldn't be long now until their lives changed forever. Despite the confidence that many of them had in the mission, however, there were some members of the team that weren't so sure of themselves, certain that something, somehow, had to go wrong. Michael, one of the youngest members of the group, followed on from the back of the line, shaking slightly as he held his rifle in his hands. The man could barely contain his nerves as they made their way on. There was little around here that did not terrify him. Although he had used many weapons throughout his life, this was the first time that he would go hunting with one. Although he had no great love for animals or anything like that, he was wary that there could be dangers lurking, something that the team had not accounted for. This would always make it difficult for him to lead from the front, full of the knowledge that, at any moment, things could go dreadfully wrong. Sometimes it was just too much for him to handle. For every moment that passed, his eyes remained fixed to the group leader, Alex. For Alex, this was far from his first trip into the mountains. In fact, Michael was quite sure that Alex had been brought up near this area. In many ways, he was the perfect man for the job. It was this, at least in part, that kept Michael moving. The knowledge that he was in safe hands here. After all, there wasn't much that Alex hadn't seen in these parts. Before long, it wasn't just Michael that felt uneasy about what was appearing all around them. In the beginning, many of the team had been sure that this would be easy. But then, the changes in their environment started to come thick and fast. It began with the terrain, which had previously been smooth and reliable. By this point in the trail, there were several members of the group sliding as the path became broken. It was clear that there hadn't been many people to make it this far. Even as some of them started to find things more difficult, Alex was quick to brush off their complaints, simply telling them that they needed to adjust if they were going to keep up with him. As he said this, the group could only look on in exasperation, amazed that their leader was able to keep such a pace without even seeming to break a sweat. Many of the other hunters were torn between admiration and despair. How much longer could they keep this up for? Unfortunately for many of them, though, there were things in their environment that made the whole ascent even harder. It was Michael that started to notice these things first. Somehow, the trees were becoming vastly thicker, towering over them as they struggled to keep up the pace. There came a stage where he wanted to say something, to shout out to the front of the line. Surely they had to be going the wrong way now. There was no way that there could be any kind of animal out here. How would they survive on this type of terrain? Just as these thoughts crossed Michael's mind, however, the team encountered something that they could never have expected. Even Alex seemed slightly unsettled as the small bear crossed the path of the group. Perhaps the thing that disturbed the group the most was the size of the cub. Although it was clearly a child, it was still of considerable size for an undeveloped bear. Every single one of the men started to dread about the size that the animal would reach in a few years' time. Hopefully, they would be long gone from here by the time that it reached maturity. A few moments passed, and as the crew sensed that the bear was alone, they were quite content to pass it by. All in all, they felt quite lucky that it hadn't brought any friends with it. However, as Michael shot a look behind him, he saw that they should have gone with their instincts. Sure enough, what had once been a single bear cub had now become a small troop of creatures. As soon as Michael caught a glimpse of this, he shot another glance back in the direction of Alex, who had finally seemed to break in his confidence. More than anything else, this is what made Michael realize that things were not going well. Until now, Alex had been the only one capable of keeping his composure. Although the bear was only accompanied by smaller companions, 3 other young bears that seemed to be quite acquainted with their surroundings, there was fear among the group. Where had the bears come from? Many of the team dreaded the thought of there being more. Before long, they would be in a situation where they could be overpowered. As Alex was finally able to gather himself, he called out to the rest of the team, reminding them that the bears posed no threat as long as the men didn't cause a disturbance. For many of them, this was enough to keep them calm. Alex had taken them this far. They didn't have much choice now but to trust his word. With that, the team was able to progress once again. Still, they placed their trust in Alex, who led strongly from the front, now barking orders to those around him as they struggled to keep the pace that he set. Michael was becoming more disturbed as ever as he watched the stronger individuals around him start to wilt and become weaker with the journey. He had known all along that this would be a difficult task, but it was only now that he saw what he had signed up for. Within himself, he wished that he had never come here today. Strangely, however, he was still able to keep the pace. As much as the ascent tested him, it appeared that he was stronger than he thought. The path ahead was becoming both steeper and narrower. By now, there were multiple members of the team that found themselves falling over as they tried to make their way through the foliage. A few of them looked up, spying the sky above, now immersed in thick mist. It was as though they were reaching the end of the earth. At least, that was how many of them felt as they did their best to keep going. At long last, after what had felt like days of walking, the team finally came to a clearing. It was like heaven to them. The ground was finally flat and reliable. The path could be seen clearly ahead. The team almost felt the need to celebrate. Although they were no closer to their vantage point or any kills, this was still a significant stage in their journey. They knew now that things could only get easier. Just as this thought crossed their minds, however, there was something greater that decided to cross their path. Something that they should have really seen coming. The first growl was low and determined. Already the entire team was forced to freeze still. As always, Alex was the only one that seemed to show a level of initiative. This was exactly what they needed right now. As soon as he heard the noise through the trees, the group leader dropped to the floor immediately, putting a hand to his mouth as he indicated the team to be deadly silent. After making the signal, the man went back to darting his head in both directions, scanning for any sign of danger. Upon seeing that there was nothing there, he retreated back to his position, which everyone else then copied in turn. Just as the team thought that the danger had passed, however, it became clear to them that they had ignored what was right in front of them. The bear that stood before them now was far, far greater than the ones that they had seen earlier. At that very moment, it seemed quite calm and composed, very different from the animal that they had heard almost a minute ago. As the creature surveyed its options, the team could do nothing but look desperately into the floor, hoping with all they had that the bear would simply move on and leave them alone. But they were not so lucky. Once again, the bear erupted with an almighty roar, sending the birds in the trees off in all directions. "Don't run!" Alex yelled out back to everyone behind him. To the leader's despair, there were few that listened to him, with many of the pack fleeing off into the folds of trees behind them. Another roar shortly followed. Michael was one of the few that remained, soon seeking shelter behind a large rock as he struggled to recover his breath. Why did he ever think that this was a good idea? His thoughts scrambled with what the others were doing now. Had they been able to escape the area completely? Could he be sure that any of them had made it all? As he tried to come to terms with what was happening all around him, he shot a quick look in the direction of where the bear was before. Now, there was no creature to be seen. That was all that it took for his nerves to build even more. The man felt that he would explode with fear at any moment. How could something so large and powerful move around with such stealth? His heart was hammering against his chest now as he tried to decide on his next move. Could he really expect to survive if he just stayed here? As the man tried to deal with the pressure, he suddenly saw something that made him stop completely. It was one of the young bears from before, now separated from what he presumed to be its mother. Michael didn't know how to feel as the animal, far smaller than its brothers and sisters, snuggled up to him. All of a sudden, the man felt the intensity of the situation die away. As much as he knew what was out there, nothing could stop him from admiring the moment. Even though he knew that he had to run, he found himself staring into the curious creature's eyes, trying to decode its thoughts as he did so. The bear's fur was far softer than he would have imagined. He could barely believe what he was doing as he sheltered the young animal, knowing full well that the parent would discover them before long. And just like that, as soon as the man's thoughts crossed the great monster once again, he burst into action, as he knew that he had to. Bundling his new friend under his arm and barely thinking about what he would do next, Michael sprang up and fled into the stretch of forest. As he did, he fired looks in several directions, desperate to locate someone that could help him out of this mess. Still, there was no one. Even Alex, who he presumed would have stayed to save him, had scampered off into another area. The eerie silence that the team witnessed before, it was back. It was just like the moment when they had first heard the bear's great roars, only to be plunged into the silence once again. Michael was sure that he was making the right decision now, and yet nothing could stop the anxiety that ran through his body. Just where exactly was the bear hiding now? Deep within, he knew that it was only a matter of time until he had to run for his life once again. Somehow, even as Michael tore his way through the trees, the young bear that had been bundled up into his arms was perfectly calm. All the while, it seemed to think that nothing significant was happening at all. Its eyes remained calm and silent, staring toward Michael as he struggled to think of his next move. There seemed to be no end to the thick trees that he waded through, and Michael was very quickly losing the last of his stamina. No matter how fatigued he became, however, he knew that he had to keep moving if he was going to get himself out of this mess. There had to be another clearing somewhere, a place where he could finally take a rest. After what felt like another lifetime of sprinting through the wilderness, Michael finally spotted a break in the foliage. Drawing on the last of his energy, he burst out from the trees, still clutching the small bear tightly in his grasp. He was safe. There was plenty of cover here, and the man was now confident that he had a real place to hide. Perhaps now he could afford to relax at least a little. But he was not so lucky. The sight of the monstrous bear came as a greater surprise than before. The creature was the kind of the thing that he had only ever seen in his nightmares. How on earth had it made its way into the real world? It was only at this moment that Michael could appreciate the full size of the beast, stretching its impressive mass across his vision. It was truly like something out of a horror story, an image that he could only imagine. He was so shocked by the sight of the great animal that he almost dropped the small bear that was held in his hands. All along, he had the answer right next to him. The reason why they had all been pursued from the very beginning. Now, noticing what had happened, Michael didn't dare break eye contact with the formidable bear that stood before him, anxious to show that he was no longer going to flee or hide. It was clear that the bear knew he was no threat. But that didn't change the fact that Michael was holding on to its child. As cute as the little creature was, he knew that he had to hand the child over before things got even worse for him. Shaking slightly, Michael was just about able to drop the floor, carefully removing his right arm which cradled the small bear. But there was something wrong. The little creature refused to move, remaining rooted in his arms as he tried to indicate that it was time to go. Michael's heart was beating faster than ever now. How could the small bear not tell that it was time to go back where it belonged? Was the creature's naivety really going to get him killed? The intensity only continued to build as the parent moved closer and closer still, now wanting to see what was taking so long. Michael almost felt the need to scream as he saw the little creature still refusing to break from his grasp. This couldn't be happening. The gigantic bear was still edging closer, with the silence now breaking as it began to release a slow growl. As much as the noise sent a bolt of terror through Michael, it was the final sign that caused the little bear to go back where it belonged. As the creature unraveled itself and scampered off towards the large bear, Michael could finally allow himself to breathe properly again. It was finally over. His body felt weightless as he made his way back from the clearing, sure that he now had a story to tell for the rest of his life. The man didn't dare look back as he heard the bear shift back into the darkness. It wasn't long before Michael started to hear the voices of the rest of the team now. He wondered if they were still looking for him. Perhaps they thought that the bear had taken him. Sure enough, as he turned past yet another set of enormous trees, he finally set his eyes on the rest of the team that had come here today. He couldn't see a single face that wasn't amazed by what it saw. Each of them looked as though they had been through a battle, with quite a few men having rips on their clothing and marks and scars on their faces. As much as they seemed in disbelief to see Michael untouched, not one of them could say a word about what had happened. It wasn't difficult for Michael to tell that they had had an equally nightmarish time. Along with the poor condition that a few of the men were in, Michael also noticed that almost all of the team had ditched their weapons. All in all, it was clear that the entire mission had been a complete mission. As much as they were in great despair about the waste of a day that they had just had, Michael was the only member of the team that remained quite optimistic about everything. After everything that had happened, he had come to learn that this business wasn't for him in the least. Perhaps it was time to try something else. We hope that you found this story impactful. Let us know what you think in the comments, and please leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it. Can you think of any examples in your own life where you have experienced something similar, maybe a dangerous situation that could have been avoided? We hope that this story shows the other side to situations like these. Even when we find ourselves in difficult moments, there are still things that can inspire us and show us beauty.